Okay, welcome all to this seventh session. We've started a quarter late, but in academic circles that's a rather regular way of losing time. But first of all, I would like to invite you to listen to an announcement by the organizing committee.
So, two, let's say, more practical issues. There will be a photographer passing by in session 8 and will take pictures of us. If someone of you doesn't want to be on these pictures, just raise your hand or tell him or whatever. The second thing is that in order for us to publicate the pictures he will take, we need the authorization of yours. So please fulfill and sign the form you should have on your table, you should have received, and put it outside on the table so that we can then proceed and with this action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This session will be a future-oriented session. As you have noticed, there are two keywords in the title of this session: brainstorming and next steps. There's an excellent panel, very well prepared, to give the assist and to nourish the reflection and debate. In a moment, Lorenzo, Mariam and Ronald will inform us about their current action and their action by their respective organizations, but also about the next steps they are taking in promoting media pluralism, in challenging internet freedom, and in combating cyber hate. These introductions will be followed by a short presentation of a study, a report, I must say, by Oreste and Marco on genocide denial, a very actual topic after the controversial bill in France on the denial of the Armenian genocide, and especially the finding of its unconstitutionality because of breach of freedom of expression as protected by Article 11 of the French Declaration of 1789. It is illustrating to see that we sometimes have to get back to the ideas and values of the Enlightenment, still also in 2012, and certainly also in the future. I will immediately give the floor to the panelists. I will do my utmost, and I will be very severe to have the time schedule respected. Briefly, I'll introduce myself. I'm teaching at Ghent University in Belgium and Copenhagen University in Denmark, mainly on media law and journalistic ethics. I'm also a member of the Flemish media regulator dealing with protection of minors and non-discrimination issues. I've published on different aspects of media law and freedom of expression, including also hate speech, Holocaust denial, and on the legal framework on investigative journalism, including protection of journalistic sources, whistleblowing, and news gathering practices on or just over the edge of what is legal. I'm also supervising a research project on chilling effect and freedom of expression, so that's a justification probably of me being here. This conference is a regional, a European conference. I would like to start this brainstorming issue with an example precisely from the EU, meant to promote ideas of European citizenship, diversity and democracy, and this by way of a short video clip, especially addressing a very important part of the population. We have heard it already this morning, young people, the young generation. I think it is an example that clearly demonstrates that more reflection and brainstorming is still needed within the EU, within Europe, in order to promote these values of diversity, citizenship in a global environment. The video I invite you to have a look at has been withdrawn short after its release. Some of you might have heard about it. and I think for obvious reasons. Let's have a look. I don't comment for the moment on this clip. It's very controversial, and given the controversies, the EC has decided to stop the campaign immediately and to withdraw the video. A statement has been released by Stefano Sannini, the director of the DG Enlargement. As an introduction, brainstorming is needed. First round, each 7 minutes. Oresto and Marco will have 10 minutes together. Then there will be some questions. I don't want mini lectures. Questions after the presentations, brief, clear, and concise. I give now the floor to the first panelist, which is Lorenzo Marsili of European Alternatives, who will give us an overview of the experiment and the initiative he is elaborating within European Initiative. Please, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I think you've done your utmost to frighten me about the 7 minutes, so I will, assuming this turns on, I will try to absolutely stick to that. Okay, here we go. Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Initiative for Media Pluralism, which is a coalition of around 30 organizations and growing, about to launch a European campaign for the defense of media pluralism and media freedom at European level, which I will tell you briefly about in the next 6 minutes and 45 seconds. I think it's very telling that this morning's session has been very much focused on the Hungarian emergency. That's a very telling moment. It's a very telling insight into the political moment we're living in when it comes to media freedom in Europe. If such a conference had taken place a year and a half ago, a similar sense of urgency would have been given to the Italian anomaly or the Italian emergency. That emergency has not in any way substantially improved. It's just been overshadowed by an even greater emergency in Hungary. Now, our intuition is that unless we learn to take action at European level, next year the Hungarian situation will be overshadowed perhaps by a Bulgarian emergency, and the year after it will be perhaps a Romanian emergency. And all in the meantime, we will have a continued evidence of overlaps between political and media actors, as is increasingly evident in France during the election campaign in these coming weeks. The bottom line for us is that we need to find a European dimension to the fight for media freedom and media pluralism. Something that we said a couple of years ago when we were working with the European Parliament in condemning Italy's perceived violations of media freedom. is that unless the European institutions stop such violations, this will lead to a domino effect, with worsening legislation in one country leading to worsening legislation in another country and throughout the European Union. Something that we put in the report that we sent to the MEPs and that was included in the resolution condemning Italy's violation of media freedom. You will remember the resolution didn't pass for one vote, and one version of the resolution tied, which in the European Parliament means that it didn't pass, was this short sentence which said, the Italian example has consequences far beyond Italy. A lack of a European response to the attacks on liberty of expression in Italy would threaten one of the fundamentals of democracy throughout Europe. It would put in jeopardy progress made in former Eastern Bloc countries welcomed into the Union with regards to freedom of the expression and of the press, and it would weaken any European condemnation of censorship or press intimidation on its borders and farther abroad. This is particularly relevant when it comes to Turkey, actually. So our sentiment has been what now needs to happen is the construction of a European coalition that is able to advocate and work at European level, pushing the European institutions in a greater, to exercise a greater role for the protection of media pluralism at a transnational level. Another important element of such European work for us is developing participation and convergence. Now, media pluralism and media freedom is not just the domain of professional NGOs, of academic departments or experts. It's one of the bases of democratic life in the European Union, and it's a prerequisite for any social or cultural demand that emerges from civil society. I just want to give you a very small example of this. As you may have heard over the previous months, there has been a great mobilization in Romania defending the exploitation of a mountain, Roja Montana, by a gold mine which wants to destroy the mountain and install a gold mine. As you know, gold mines are the most polluting, the most destructive minings, etc., etc. In the media, this campaign has been nearly censored, and in any presentation of the reasons behind the construction of the gold mine, around 80% of the space has been given to the owners of the gold mine, who, by the way, yes, who happen to be also those who pay for the Romanian media in the first place. Right, so this construction of a case to say that media freedom and media pluralism is not in the realm of experts, it's in the interest of everybody, ranging from those organizations defending migrant rights to those defending environmental protection. Now, our plan is to launch a European Citizens Initiative on media freedom and media pluralism. A European Citizens Initiative is a new tool of direct democracy. It allows for citizens from April to collect 1 million signatures in at least 7 member states to present a legislative proposal directly at the European Commission. We want to use this tool to present the European Commission with a legislative proposal on media pluralism and specifically an anti-concentration directive. A very interesting element of the European Citizens Initiative is that precisely it allows to build a transnational coalition which goes beyond the professional sector or the NGOs or the universities, and to really develop the capacity to act on media freedom at a European level, at a transnational level, touching a plurality of local concerns beyond just the experts. The directive that we are working on, I don't have time to present it at the moment. Maybe in the next, in the questions I can go a little bit more in depth on this. It's currently under preparation. We haven't finalized the text yet. It will be finalized within the month of April. The main area where we have isolated European competencies, because one of the problems of the Citizens Initiative is that it needs to lie within existing European competencies, is the area obviously of antitrust and antitrust legislation and competition law. So the draft text that is currently being elaborated demands something close to a harmonization of anti-concentration laws, in particular for the publicity sector and also, of course, for diffuse property of the media sector. I really don't have any time, I'm told, to go in depth on this, but I have some copies of this which I can circulate, and we would very much welcome any comment or feedback on this proposal. Now, the next concrete steps for the European Initiative campaign is to build national coordinations. We're in the process of doing this. We have, as I said, around 30 organizations and growing involved in the campaign. In each member state, we're working with 9 member states at the moment. We're building a coordination of organizations. There are about 12 of them in Italy. There are 5 of them in Romania, which will lead the campaign at a national and local level. All these different national coordinations will be then coordinated at a European level through a transnational European coordination of the media initiative or the campaign. The campaign will be launched in the European Parliament on April 26th, and this will be the moment when the campaigning will start. We will begin a communication work and a media work to try and make this campaign really a citizens' campaign, not just an expert campaign, but a campaign that touches the concerns of citizens throughout Europe and also who raises awareness in citizens and civil society groups of the importance of media freedom for a plurality of interests. This communication work is extremely important for us. We need all the help we can get in building an understanding of the local situations and how a demand for a European directive on anti-concentration law can be presented as being in the interest of local communities throughout Europe in the very different national and local contexts of the European Union. This is a work of political translation. We need to explain to an activist group, Inclusion Apoca Romania, or one in Barcelona, why this directive is important for them, why it supports the work that they are doing, and in so doing we should be able to build a strong firepower, an expression that we hear very much when we talk about the economic crisis now, a strong firepower for the defense of media freedom and a strong support network that is trans-European and cross-sectorial on this issue. And please, I will end by saying, do contact us. I'm very delighted to send any information on the steps of the campaign, on the initiative draft and the legislative text that is behind the campaign, and we really see this as a horizontal initiative that needs everybody's help to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Really a challenging initiative, applying participatory democracy at different levels. We look forward to the 26th of April when your project is launched, but you also made clear we will not just wait for it. There will be a strong coalition needed in several countries in order to make your project succeed. In the meantime, Mariam Omidi had the opportunity to start the PowerPoint for her presentation. Miriam is working in the free speech debate at Oxford University, also initiating a set of initiatives of which she will inform us just now. Miriam, you have the floor.
Great. Hi, my name is Mariam Omidi. I'm the online editor for a free speech research project at Oxford University. The project is the brainchild of Timothy Garton-Ash, who is a historian and journalist who unfortunately couldn't be here today. The premise of the project is based on a very simple proposition, which has been grossly exaggerated to make a point, and that is that we are all neighbors now, either physically because of mass migration or virtually because of the internet. There are roughly 2 billion people online, another 2 billion on mobiles. Information and ideas are sort of flowing across borders like never before. And this very much sort of changes the debate around freedom of speech, which was traditionally centered on legislation in the US, the First Amendment, in the UK, common law. And while law is important, we feel that we need to go beyond legislation, especially in this new world where private powers, internet giants such as sort of Google and Facebook, are really sort of proving just as important in shaping freedom of speech as governments. If Facebook was a country, it would be the third biggest country in the world. And so with this project, we're really trying to kind of determine what the rules of the game are, what are our own community standards, and it's a global project. All our content is translated into 13 languages, and with these 13 languages, we could potentially reach between 80 and 85% of the world's internet users. The project is centered around, organized around 10 draft principles for global free speech, and I emphasize the fact that they're draft. We invite readers to come onto our site and debate the principles, let us know whether they agree with them, disagree with them in any of the 13 languages. In addition to that, we have case studies that illustrate many of the more abstract ideas behind the principles. We have interviews, discussion pieces, interviews with sort of high-profile individuals, Arundhati Roy, the novelist, for example, Mark Thompson, Director General of the BBC on religion, former Formula One boss Max Mosley on privacy, etc. And users are really invited to sort of come onto the site and just join the debate. And the idea idea is that someone in China should be able to speak with someone in Russia on any of these issues. I'm not going to be able to go through all of the 10 draft principles, so I'm just going to focus on one, which is our fourth principle, which is essentially on hate speech. So principle 4 says, we speak openly and with civility about all kinds of human difference. I'm just going to play you a short clip of an interview with Ezra Levant, who's a Canadian publisher and lawyer who's prosecuted in Canada for republishing the Danish cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. And Ezra Levant does not believe hate speech is a crime, and this is what he has to say. It's a very bad recording, but...
I believe that hate speech is a crime or an offense. Hate's a human emotion. If you don't ever feel hate, you have a broken personality. Every one of us feels love and hate, contempt and respect probably every day.
I'm not sure whether that was audible or not, but he basically says hate is a human emotion, and if you don't feel hate, you have a broken personality. Hate speech is not a crime. So, oh, sorry, wrong. Okay, let's move on to, we have a couple of pieces on our site, discussion pieces. The first is by Jeremy Waldron, who is a professor of law and philosophy, and he says that hate speech legislation is actually essential and it's necessary to protect vulnerable minorities, especially sort of protects their dignity and stops them living in fear, especially to sort of community level. In response to that, we have Ivan Hare, who's sort of come online and said that actually hate speech legislation is harmful and it does not protect vulnerable minorities. And often it is actually used against individuals from minorities who forcefully express themselves against the majority. Oh, I'm not very good at this. Right. Just to give you another example of, hopefully this audio clip will be a bit clearer, Susan Benesch, who's a human rights expert, and she has sort of developed this idea of dangerous speech and how you sort of define dangerous speech, and by that she means speech that incites violence.
The first is the speaker. Some speakers, as we all know, are much more compelling, and therefore if they use intimidating, violent, inciting speech, then that speech is more dangerous when spoken by some people. The second is the audience. Some audiences are more likely to react violently for a whole set of reasons. The content of the speech itself, of course, is important. Some speech is more dangerous than others simply because of what it says. The fourth criterion is the historical and social context, and the fifth is the mode of dissemination.
So that was Susan Benesch just outlining the 5 sort of criteria that could potentially sort of lead to speech that is dangerous. Right. And then we have a piece also on our site by Mohsen Kadivar, who's an Iranian theologian, an opponent of the Iranian government. And his discussion was about Islam between free speech and hate speech. And he writes that Islam accepts atheism, which is quite sort of controversial. No one should be punished for their beliefs, and criticizing Islam is allowed. Sort of fairly liberal. Except that, he also says, insulting, ridiculing, scorning religious beliefs, including atheism, should be considered a punishable offense. So I just wanted to sort of take you through some of the kind of discussion pieces, the interviews that we have on our website, and the kind of things that we are sort of inviting readers to, users, to come and discuss on our site in any of our sort of 13 languages, which I'll just sort of run through them briefly. Arabic, Chinese, in fact, maybe I can do this on our site. Yeah, so we have Arabic, German, English, Spanish, Farsi, French, Hindi, Japanese, Portuguese, Turkish, and Chinese. And I'm done. And that's it.
Okay. Please, as you will.
Don't need to sit and say it.
Thank you, Mariam. That was very interesting. I must have impressed my panelists yesterday evening because they are both very sharply within the 7-time limit. I hope the same of Ronald Eisen, who will introduce to us a project he's involved in combating cyber hate. Please, Ronald.
I'm promising nothing, Dirk. Ladies and gentlemen, The International Network Against Cyber Hate was founded in 2002 by two NGOs, a Dutch NGO, Magenta Foundation, which I'm the director of, and a German semi-governmental, semi-NGO organization called Jugendschutznet, which is the youth protection department, really, a sub-department of the youth protection ministry. Both organizations were already in the forefront of dealing with cyber hate. We didn't call it that way back in 1993, 1994. But we found each other in 2002 and we decided to form a network of like-minded organizations which aim it was to fight online hate. And this culminated in the International Network Against Cyber Hate. And these days we are uniting 20 organizations in 19 countries. And this is how that looks. I see that the sound effect is gone, but hey. So we are everywhere, it seems. Of course, we are only in 20 countries. Our mission and vision, I'm not going to read it for you because that will eat into my precious 7 minutes. But basically, it says that we work for a better internet. We want a better internet. We want a better internet environment with less hate. Of course, we can't have one without hate. That's impossible. We try to reach our goals by, that goes very slow, uniting organizations, fighting against cyber hate, exchanging information to enhance the effectivity of such organizations, lobbying for the harmonization of laws to combat discrimination. As we all know, in Europe and outside, some countries do have legislation on discrimination, but it differs per country, and we think that we need to harmonize that. We support groups and institutions who want to set up a complaints bureau for hate on the net. We work on creating awareness and promoting attitude change about discrimination on the internet by giving information, by working on education, by doing media training, media awareness training. We do dialogue with the internet industry and other stakeholders like the social media. And we do organize an annual conference on topical subjects. This is one of those conferences in Vienna 2 years ago. Our INAH members, we monitor cyber hate, we take action against online hate, we publish reports, we train and we educate, we exchange information, and here are some figures, which is quite a lot, and we're very happy with that. There are a number of ways to counter online hate. Dirk asked me to give an example of that. Removal. Redwatch. Redwatch was and is a website started by Combat 18 and also affiliated with a number of other UK-based extremist groups. And Redwatch publishes hit lists. They're targeting people. They're targeting Jews, Muslims, human rights defenders. They're targeting Roma. They're targeting anybody they think is left-wing. They're targeting me, actually. And when I say targeting, I mean to be killed. So this is an example of a site which we had to chase through 6 countries, 6 jurisdictions. We took them down in one country, we took them down in the next country, we took them down in that country. Until after 6 countries, they fled to a jurisdiction which at that moment we couldn't reach. Right now, at this moment, it's still online in both the United Kingdom, again, and in Poland, I'm afraid. But sites like that, they are a danger. They're a danger to all of us. And you can say that freedom of speech is very important, and it is in every democracy, and also to foster and strengthen democracy, freedom of speech is very important. But the notion that some have that sites like that should have the right to be there, to promote their violence, to promote killing other people, that notion does the rounds in some circles and we want nothing of it. We call that human rights, free speech fundamentalism. I mean, I can go all Voltairean and say, well, there's this extremist side that wants to kill me, Ronald Eisens. You know, let's defend their right to the death. To say that I should be killed, well, I must be stark raving mad if I would do that. So this is not the way we are going with that. We want to take them down as fast as possible. Other ways, prosecution. A number of organizations in our member base do work with prosecution. There are others that work on the basis of online complaints through complaints mechanism. For instance, my own bureau in the Netherlands, we get in complaints, we assess the material, our legal experts assess the material. If they think it is punishable under the Dutch Penal Code on discrimination, we send a request for removal to the author of or the owner of the material, and 75% of the cases in the Netherlands it gets taken down because the Dutch are all such law-abiding citizens. I mean, the figures are very different in other countries. So in other countries, other methods are used. Our partners in America use public naming and shaming. Most of us also talk to the industry to convince them to take down certain material, which can get into very, very crazy discussions, like the one we have right now with Facebook. Facebook is of the opinion that Holocaust denial, yes, it's very bad, but it's not in all cases hate. Well, when they told us that, we laughed in their face. By its nature, Holocaust denial is hate speech. So, there are other methods and other ways to go about it, like talkback, counter speech, which is very time consuming and very hard to do, but I think very effective. And all of the methods in their own way are important, useful and effective. Right now the INAG network is working on a charter for good internet use, of which we will ask all internet actors, industry, users, social media, what have you got, to become a member to undersign it. So that is the future, because in the end it all comes down to the pyramid of hate. It starts with words, it ends with genocide. Having said that, of course, in the end, removing stuff from the internet is only a short-time measure. The internet being the great big recycler, the copy-paste universe, stuff gets rehashed, it appears on other places. In the end, you will not be able to get hate speech removed, so you need to do other things, and those other things are, I mentioned it already, counter speech. It's a very important one. Media awareness, train young people how to handle internet, what hate is, what discrimination is, how to go about that, how to recognize it. So methods like that are the future. But, and in closing, I want to really stress this. We will keep on working on removing hate speech, especially hate speech that incites to violence. I mean, the fact that crimes continue despite the police doing their work, you also don't say like, well, it doesn't work what you're doing, let's abolish the police. No, we should keep on policing the internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronald, for indicating the set of actions that you are taking proactively, I would say, as an activist group. It also shows how civil society itself, how human rights organizations can make a difference, that you don't need to wait until police takes action or public prosecutors follow. And I think we also have a good tension maybe here between two approaches. The one on trying to combat hate speech, and you stressed specifically incitement to violence, but also keep open the debate, not only of the harm of hate speech, but also the harm of overbroad prohibiting of hate speech, which brings us back at the introduction by Jochem Vrielink in the beginning of this meeting yesterday. So I'm very grateful that we could have some feedback on these issues as well in terms of how we practice these approaches. I'm very glad now to give the floor to Oreste and Marco, who will introduce the issue, actual discussion on genocide denial. And if I'm right, Oreste, you will give a short introduction, give the floor afterwards to Marco, and you will draw some conclusions or formulate some recommendations. Please, Oreste, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Everybody knows what is genocide denial. What could be more interesting is to understand which are the reaction, the legal reaction to genocide denial. And in general, the common standard is implementing a criminal sanction against the denier, limiting his personal freedom. But to try to fit this paper on the debate, I thought it could be interesting to ask as a first research question, which is the very tiny line between the exercise of a right, in this case freedom of expression, and the abuse of a right. In this case, clearly the conflict between freedom of expression and other constitutional values. And there are at least two things to be considered in this, I think, framework. The first one, the twofold nature of hate speech. The first one is clearly could be considered included in the scope of the exercise of freedom expressions, clearly depending on the model, European, USA, but I will not go into detail on this. The second is that clearly the hate speech could create serious breach of human rights, especially the human dignity. And again, here it would be interesting to see which is the difference in terms of understanding of human dignity between the USA and the European constitutionalism. Second point to take in consideration are the ingredients that are together make a general context of this issue. In the USA, we see freedom of speech, freedom of speech, hate speech, together with sometimes cultural diversity, sometimes equality, which is the added value of the European debate. I think is the direct combination between law and history, in the sense, which could be, which is the role of the law towards the historian narrative. And it's not only theoretical questions, because we have a lot of lois mémorielles that are doing exactly this. They are fixing by the law an historical event in order to avoid the risk to be forgotten. And then another combination, memory and laws, which is the relationship between memory and laws. How we'll go to develop these research questions? By adopting a methodological view that is well known as a multi-level protection dimension. So we will look at the different level of protection of fundamental rights, how the conflicts, its balance in the international global dimension, in the European international dimension, and then in the national dimension with a comparative perspective. So please, Marco.
Thank you, Oreste. Thank you, Dirk. Within the international law, we have a lot of documents which deal with matters such as racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination, or religious discrimination, but neither the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, nor the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, nor the Convention on the Elimination of all the forms of discrimination establish any specific provision with respect to genocide denial. At international level, however, there is an important case which has been highlighted by many others, which was a case arising from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, arising out of an application filed by Professor Fiesolana, a French negationist from the University of Lyon, who claimed a decision of a French court who had convicted him for some theories based on genocide denial after the enactment in France of a law Against the denial and the trivialization of some crimes of genocide. In that case, however, the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations rejected the claim of Professor Fiesolana, since Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protects the freedom of expression, also established that this right cannot be abused, and this right can be limited when it is necessary for the protection, for instance, of public order or morals. With respect to the European law level, we have to consider the European Convention of Human Rights. In particular, two are the reference which we have to look at. First of all, Article 10, which protects the freedom of expression, but also in the second paragraph established that the freedom of expression is not an absolute right and can be limited when some conditions are met, provided that these restrictions are necessary in a democratic society. Also, in the European Convention of Human Rights, there is another important rule, which is Article 17, which established the so-called abuse clause. This provision provides that nothing in the European Convention of Human Rights may be interpreted and constructed in order to allow person or group or any person to activities which may result in a destruction or in the limitation of the same rights protected by the European Convention of Human Rights. So Article 17 has been already referred by the court in order to reject all the claims against national convictions for offense such as the genocide denial. With respect to the comparative perspective, I want to draw a distinction between two important cases, which is helpful for us to understand the difference between the model of a tolerant democracy and the model of militant democracy. As to the model of militant democracy, we can look at Germany, which is of course one of the states most concerned with the punishment of hate speech, generally speaking, and also with genocide denial. However, in Germany, until 1994, there was no specific provision aimed at sanctioning the denial or the gross trivialization. There were some important provisions with respect to the incitement to hatred or the violence. But there was a ruling of the Constitutional Court which established that this expression cannot fall within the scope of freedom of expression. And as a consequence of that, in reaction to that, the legislator enacted some provision to criminalize the denial of theories-based, of negationist theories. On the other hand, we have Spain, where in 2007, the Constitutional Court struck down a provision of the Criminal Code which criminalized the offense of denial and the apology. The court only struck down the part of the provision related to the denial, because denial is a mere negation of facts and is not suitable, according to the court, to result in an opinion offensive and to human dignity or other important values. So this is the main difference between a model of tolerant and militant democracy. More recently, we have a judgment of the French Constitutional Court, the Conseil Constitutionnel, which have addressed a law aimed at introducing a new provision in the law on the freedom of expression, which already expressed forbidden to gross trivialization and denial of genocide of certain type of crimes, but only to a limited number of crimes, those committed under the rule of Nazism and those referred by the statute of the International Military Tribunal. And also, another requirement is provided by the French law. The member of the organization or the subject who have to be committed the offense, which is subject to denial, have to be found guilty by a court, by a jurisdiction, French or international. This was a very limited requirement because in France there is a great Armenian community which was challenging this provision, asking for protection also for the denial of genocides other than those provided by the International Military Tribunal Statute. And this was the reason why recently the court has considered a new law and struck down the provision, as Oreste will now explain.
Yeah, I think that about 1.5 minutes perhaps to. So the reasoning of the Conseil Constitutionnel are short, but not so short to comment in 2 minutes. What is interesting that in the 6 paragraphs you can see emerging some points that I think are worth to mention. Which was the main problem of the previous law? A too broad judicial discretion. And which has been the problem that the Conseil Constitutionnel found in the new proposed law? A too broad legislative dimension. So now we are in the framework of government, the relationship between judicial and legislative. And why he has been considered in contrast with freedom of expression? Because the only fact that a denial of historical event is considered a crime for the simple and only fact that this is decided by the state, it's clearly depriving the legislation of his, let's say, value soul. Which are the values, which is his value-based soul? His dignity and his history. This is exactly the reason because it was found not justified, applying clearly the well-known proportionality principle. But if I could end with one final remark. We know perfectly that the Declaration de l'Homme has been at the root of constitutionalism, the antagonist of the natural law-based American Constitution. We had the positive model that was exactly this, and the natural law model that was the American Constitution. What is the paradox of this reasoning? That exactly in the antagonist model of natural law, so the positive law dimension, the Conseil Constitutionnel tried to find argumentation based on natural values that go exactly beyond the law, for the simple fact that the law, the state is deciding what is a crime and what is not, only on the will of the majority. The consequence is that it's depriving of that values that before to be legal are natural, are common of the society, that are clearly in a way natural based law. So this is, I think, an interesting paradox that perhaps it could be explored in the debate. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Oreste and Marco, for this. It brings us back in the discussion about overbroadness of legal restrictions in the area, the tension also between memory laws on the one hand and laws tending to prohibit or prevent incitement to discrimination and violence, which are of a quite other nature. I would like to open the floor now for concrete questions, questions for clarifications regarding one of the initiatives which have been taken or which will be taken very soon, if not other specific questions for additional observations. I see one finger, Tarlek, the next one is Uladzislo, and then I see a few more there from the person who just became a famous poet amongst us. A Nobel Prize is waiting for you, I'm sure. And a bit further, I can't see your name. In that order, can we do that? Tarlik, Uladzislo, Peter, and the next one. Please, Tarlik.
Thank you also to all of the presenters for their contributions. My question is directed at the paper presentation, which of course addresses a very timely and pressing issue. You usefully walked us through a number of the leading international human rights treaties that do not have explicit provisions on genocide denial, and you discussed briefly their relevance. However, I don't think I heard you refer to the additional protocol to the Council of Europe's Cybercrime Convention, which does have an explicit provision on genocide denial. And I wonder if you've had the opportunity to engage in any critical reflection on the significance of that provision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In a way, I'm agreeing with Professor Dirk Voorthoff that actually this panel is essentially about naming. So how far could we strengthen, how far could we extend the notion of hate speech? And I have two short comments. If the time permits, I will come up with the longer proposition during the debate time. I see it located in the program, on, in particular on genocide denial. So my first short comment, and I'm briefly, yeah, I'm sorry for being so nasty, but Miriam, I very much enjoyed your presentation, apart from the fact that none of your examples dealt with hate speech. Both of your examples on Muhammad caricature and atheist writings in Iran both refer to the so-called issue of religious blasphemy, and they are treated under absolutely different rubric. And moreover, considering that you are representing the so-called free speech debate initiative, I think it's somewhat even dangerous falsifying facts for the large auditorium and bringing them for the debate. If you might be interested, I would refer to the very extensive and interesting literature. As far as the issue of Holocaust denial is concerned, well, I thought I made it clear also yesterday within my presentation that that's the issue. I'm absolutely non-mainstream European. I think that genocide denial is whatever, but not hate speech should be treated absolutely differently, and there are a series of normative criteria to which I wish to refer during the debate. My question, more concrete. Well, one document which was referred, Cybercrime Convention, which is more of a soft law by the Council of Europe, I would like to refer to the hard law, actually, which applies to 27 EU member states. The Council decision of 2008, which came into force in 2010, which, apart from making the criminalization of the so-called xenophobic speech, also brings Holocaust denial. Just one instance of genocide denial, one instance of historical revisionism into the camp of obligatory criminalization. So how does that deal with chilling effect? Thank you very much.
For these two questions, the next one is Peter. Peter first, yeah.
I would, in connection with the Holocaust denial laws, the working of which is also very controversial in Hungary, I would like to raise a question and suggest a possible next step. And the question is that, what do you think about what I think is a paradox of trying to regulate so-called hate speech? And the paradox, I think, is that the more realistically we can trust the law enforcement institutions, from police to court, that they will fairly implement a law on so-called hate speech, maybe either content-based or based on the danger test, the less likely that that society badly needs such a restriction, because that society will be somewhat tolerant at the first place. That is why the courts and the police and other institutions are maybe likely to use the law in a fair way to protect the minorities at the first place. On the other hand, the more danger we have that the law will be abused, those are the situations when minorities are also at danger. When there is more discrimination, more prejudice, more racist speech. And I think we cannot just don't deal with this, what I call this paradox of the regulation of such speech. And what I suggest, coming from this observation, that it would be very helpful, I think, to have a map of so-called hate speech in our European countries. Of course, it should be helpful, I think, elsewhere too, but now we are looking at Europe at the first place, and the relevant regulations, and see whether the regulation captures what maybe we can call sort of real racist speech or not, whether it's helpful or not, whether it is maybe counterproductive even, because it seems that examples come up which show clear abuses of the law, or at least ineffectivity, and that means that we are doing the wrong thing. We are doing either further damage, or at least we don't do something which would be an effective response.
Thank you, Peter, for this observation. The man sitting 2 places further, you have the floor.
Thank you. I would like to make a few comments on Mr. Eisen's presentation, which I found depressing and disappointing, to be completely honest. I think caricaturing anybody who would disagree with your position as being a fundamentalist, I think, is not helpful to open debate. The costs and benefits of anything that's done online to limit speech of any kind need to be analyzed. Populism and knee-jerk reactions are often counterproductive. We heard an interesting presentation yesterday that groups with hate speech websites are often very marginalized and welcome any attention that they receive. On the basis of the research we heard yesterday, what is the potential for the removal efforts actually being welcomed by those groups? What's the cost of giving them what they want? According to the presentation, there were 16,000 removals thanks to the cyber hate network and 60 prosecutions. If those were 16,000 offenses, then those are 16,000 unprosecuted offenses. Focusing on what Mr. Eisens refers to as a temporary removals, instead of focusing on the failure of state authorities to take action against offenses, seems to be the wrong approach. What's the cost of that? What's the cost of society in putting pressure on internet companies to decide what's legal and what's permissible and what's not? What's the cost to the fight against hate speech if the counter speech is removed on the basis of complaints by the hate speech purveyors? And what's the cost for society if we abandon the rule of law completely and leave it to private companies to decide what's online and what isn't? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will close a first round here. I saw 2 more fingers. They will be the first one in the next round. Milika, and a bit further on. Forgot your first name, but you're in my... Because I think we have questions for all speakers now. The question of Tarlek, I think, is most referred to the introduction of Marco and Oreste, and so is one of the remarks of Ulas Lislo. So I suggest to start with these 2 questions and observations. Oreste, would you like to react on that?
Thanks. With regard to the first comment, I'm really grateful in the sense that we mentioned the document in the paper that will be, I hope, published soon, but we didn't have enough time, perhaps we didn't have enough I think also enough good methodology approach to try to investigate deeper in depth with regard to this that you called soft law, but I think it has an effect of moral suasion that it could be substantially considered hard law in this regard. So thank you very much for this. Perhaps we would like to speak to you personally in this regard. With regard to the second comment, I'm not sure that I got well your your point. So, according to you, the genocide denial it could not be in any case included in the notion of hate speech. I would like then to understand on the basis of which parameters and especially how you could in a way support this thesis with regard to the European experience. What we try to suggest in this paper is that is exactly the radical position that should be avoided in where there is a stake, a conflict between fundamental rights. And so the value-based approach based on balancing, I think is really something that more than constitutional court, the international court, especially the European Convention on Human Rights, in a way gave a lesson of how to reach a fair balance. Having said this, it's clear that if you look to the USA model and then to the holy vision of First Amendment, perhaps you could find more argument to your thesis. But as I said, and also as the title is shown of this paper, we are focusing on the European dimension, where it's difficult to deny that the genocide denial could not be in any way included in hate speech. With regard to the paradox that is very interesting issue raised by Peter, I will give the floor to Marco.
Yeah, I think we have considered a lot of criminal provisions of the different legal system in Europe. We could consider other more, but we limited a certain system. And we tried to understand which was the level at which any state decided to extend criminal protection, and to look at the way this fixing the level of criminal protection impact on the freedom of expression. So there is a great difference in any state with respect to this issue, because any state can decide to criminalize a different extent. Sometimes only the denial per se is relevant. In other cases, we had legislation which asked for requiring the incitement to hatred, to violence, to consider a conduct as relevant for an offense to be committed. So when you analyze the difference between the different legal systems, you realize that a different way of striking the balance between freedom of speech and criminal protection and protection of human dignity, honor, and all the other values is done. The problem is that any state decided to limit. We were talking about France. In France, for a lot of time, we had a limited range of crimes whose denial may trigger criminal liability. There were other types. I
suggest not to go into details into France, but maybe to close here that aspect, unless you want to have one additional element in this.
No, I wanted to stress just one aspect. Now we have a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which has constitutional value in Europe, and this could be a possible source of new impacts on new decisions. So it would be interesting to look at the evolution of the matter, in my opinion. So.
Okay, thank you, Reste and Marco. I would like to give the floor now to Mariam, because one of the questions also included your action.
Right. Yeah, I should probably clarify. Actually, you're completely right. So Mohsen Kadivar's piece, even though he thinks that insulting religion is a hate crime, we haven't actually published it under Principle 4. We have a principle about religion which says we respect the believer but not necessarily the content of the belief, and his piece is actually published under that and not underneath our sort of hate speech principle. And the second point, in response to the interview with Ezra Levant, I did give some biographical detail about the fact that he republished the cartoons, but the interview with him is actually more focused on hate speech, not related to that, but more about sort of Canadian human rights commissions and the fact that he doesn't believe hate speech should be an offence unless it is inciting violence. So slightly sort of taken out of context maybe, but actually it's the point I'm saying is it's not so much connected to religion really. So that's it.
Okay. We'll go to Ronald. I think we have here what we all wanted, which is an open and robust debate. So especially the last remarks, I would like to give to Ronald the opportunity of a kind of a rebuttal, and maybe also, if possible, to make some observations regarding the comment made by Peter, if possible. Thank you.
I'm going to try. Thank you, Dirk. Yes, the remarks and questions of the gentleman at the end of that row. You say you find it depressing how I characterize freedom of speech aficionados, but I didn't actually do that. I said that freedom of speech is a very important value. My characterization of those who think that even incitement to violence and murder is free speech, those people I call free speech fundamentalists. That's a very different animal, and this animal is around. I mean, the people of certain websites, certain extremist websites, who think that I should be killed and my friends should be killed and colleagues should be killed. And actually, this is not a theoretical case. At times this happens. Over the last 10 years, people get hurt badly. If you condone that in the name of freedom of speech, I say you are a freedom of speech fundamentalist. That's something else than a freedom of speech fighter or somebody who supports the freedom of speech. That's number one. Your argument is that a lot of extremist websites are quite marginal and they thrive on the attention they get from, well, organizations and people like me that try to counter their rhetoric. I actually heard this argument 10 years ago, and I will give you the same answer as 10 years ago. Well, I'm going to give you a somewhat different answer. 10 years ago, I would have said, well, yeah, but discrimination and hate speech is a very big problem and it's growing. Now I'll give you another answer. I will say discrimination and hate speech on the internet is an enormous problem that threatens democracies all over. So, I mean, the answer stays the same. It is a problem. And no, they will not go away when we leave them alone and say, well, you're marginal, we're not going to give you attention, so you won't grow. Stormfront is an enormous site with hundreds of thousands of users inciting to hate and violence every effing day. Your argument on removal, you're saying, well, there are 60,000 cases that were not prosecuted. Indeed, a number of our member bureaus, they assess material, they decide on basis of their legal opinion if something is illegal or not. And then a number of our bureaus ask the owner or author of the material to remove voluntarily. This works in a number of cases. In other countries it doesn't work, and members go to, let's say, the hosting provider or the social media provider and point out what it says in their terms of service. And I'm sorry, they are businesses, and as a business you can do what your rules are. If they want to remove, if they have that in their rules, that is their right. And of course, we benefit from that. We have the last comment. Yeah, there was something about the cost. What's the cost for society of all this? My rebuttal would say would be, what's the cost for society of hate speech? By now, it has become a lot, and most of us who are white and non-Jewish are pretty privileged when we talk about freedom of speech, because for those who are non-white and who have another color or another religion, they get hate speech every day on the internet, and they have to read it, and they have to let the anger build up, and they can't do anything. I mean, there's a lot of cost there too. Thanks.
Thank you, Ronald. It was mentioned that we would have a debate. I think we have an ongoing, a renewed debate, which is very nice. There's still time for a second round, but before opening that, I would ask Lorenzo if he could give a little bit explanation. Why have you chosen for the option of a directive on media pluralism, which is by itself a controversial issue? Why the choice that you made to head for this kind of project?
I think this is the right place to cite St. Augustine's, if there ever was one place. Exactly. And so via negativa is the approach that has led us actually to the idea of a directive. Nothing else has seemed to work. The idea that a lack of a European regulatory framework would be an advisable, beneficial situation in our minds has proven simply false by the state of the situation in Europe. The media landscape is deteriorating. It's deteriorating quite rapidly, and it's deteriorating in ways that are now undermining the fundamentals of European democracy. This is true in a plurality of European countries, and it's very true at a local level, actually, when you go and see what is the reality of mid-sized to small-sized cities in especially the eastern part of the Union. We thought that something needs to be done at European level. The only legislative force that the European Commission has is that of a directive, and to some extent that of a regulation, but the regulation we haven't really found a way of employing when it comes to media competencies and media pluralism. A directive is the closest that we have to a European law, a European legislation, and we think what we need at this moment is something that has the power of a law to place a barrier to this continuing deterioration of the media landscape. Something that I think should be added, and this links probably to the discussion on the media pluralism monitor earlier today, is also that what we're lacking is a strong capacity to mobilize citizens around the protection of media freedom and media pluralism. A year and a half ago, we had about 200,000 people in the square in Rome protesting against Berlusconi's grip on the media. Now we have seen similar mobilizations in Hungary over the recent months. We don't have, however, such capacity to mobilize in the vast majority of EU member states, and especially we don't have the capacity to mobilize for a direct European intervention when it is a whole country that moves against the principles of media freedom. Now, what we think is that presenting citizens with a clear participatory method to demand a European legislation, something that has the power of a law, also has the potential to raise that necessary mobilization and that necessary interest, synergies and convergence in the public sphere and in civil society, which, and I conclude here, which will certainly be used for the collection of the 1 million plus signatures for the demand for the EU directive, but also is a capital. It's a capital of mobilization, it's a capital of passion, it's a political capital that can be spent in other directions. For example, calling on the European Commission and calling in a very loud manner for the implementation of the media pluralism monitor, which it itself has commissioned and all the European citizens have paid for, or calling for a stronger response to a situation such as Hungary's, where the European Union's response has been timid, to say the least, and has only actually activated a stronger firepower when it was the central bank that came under accusation, not the media landscape. So it's the construction of this power which we think a law could lead to.
Thank you for this clarification. Lorenzo, I see the project is the project. You could say as part of the aim. It gave us also the opportunity, command by Lorenzo to bring more balance in the three themes: media plurality, challenges on media freedom, freedom of expression, and combating hate speech. It seems that some of the issues produce more emotions and sharp debate than some of the others. So with this additional element, I think we are more in balance again. But I would like to give the opportunity for a few more short comments. I think it's Jean-Paul, is that correct? And then Milica, and Aiden. And then the last one by Milos. Okay? Jean-Paul, please.
Thank you. If you approach the genocide denial as a free speech advocate, how do you address the objection raised by genocide scholars and some international human rights lawyers that says denial is just it's part of the process of genocide, it's the last phase of genocide. So it's not a question of a hate speech, it's a hate crime. And if you take the history of the coining of the sentence genocide, Raphael Lemkin, who is this Jewish-Polish lawyer who coined the phrase in 1943, he based his studies not on the Holocaust, but on the Armenian genocide. And he famously said, I mean, you know, when he explained how he coined the phrase, it was struck by the fact that there is a sentence attributed to Hitler when the question was asked about implementing the extermination of the Jews of Europe. He said, but who remembers the Armenian massacres? This is, I mean, for me, it's a strong objection to the question of a free speech approach to the question of genocide denial.
Thank you for that. Milica?
I'm not sure I'm saying what I'm saying at the right session, but because it's called Next Steps, I just thought, you know, I had honor to moderate a session on very media industry, and I think we should, as next step, take like training of journalists, but more important, talking to media decision makers from CEOs downwards, people who actually make really decisions, and help them answer the question, why bother? Is it a commercial reason? Do they have legal obligations to reflect diversity? Social responsibility? Is it simply sexy to talk about diversity nowadays? So something with them, media decision makers. And the last thing, we've been talking about using different terminology, but can we maybe have an event where we can talk about as Angela Merkel said, and then Cameroon stepped in and Sarkozy stepped in, has multiculturalism utterly failed? And if it is, who has failed it? A debate on this issue, and I think it's very relevant because that can help us understand why media do what they do and maybe convince them to do it a different way. Thanks.
Suggestion, I think it was Aiden.
I'm just very briefly, I mean, I want to follow up on that. I mean, I think a lot of these initiatives are really interesting and so on. Whether or not they can succeed depends, it seems to me, on the engagement of people who are actually at the heart of this. And I think, therefore, the question is, where are the media? Where are the journalist organizations? Where are those within this community that are seeking in the most progressive way, I think, actually, which is important to bring it forward. But it's not only the most progressive voices that we need to sort of get to, we need also to be raising awareness among the sort of this general community as well. So I'm particularly interested in what Lorenzo is doing, seeking to do at a European level, and I'm really saying if to be effective, it's got to reach out to media professional groups in order to, you know, to have credibility, but also, I think, in the end, to be effective, because I think your chances of getting the European Union in its present condition to be able to take on this challenge of sort of issuing a directive on these sorts of issues is absolutely, I would say it is nil, unless you can mobilize in some way, seriously, the media professional groups as well, to be engaged in the debate.
Milos?
Despite these difficulties just painted in front of us by Aidan, I do greet this initiative very much, the Pluralism initiative, even if it will be an uphill ride and a lost battle, the very demand by Europeans to cover our common values with common laws in Europe and give some teeth to the common value, also for those who are already members of the club, not only for those who are in the ascendance to membership, is very, very welcome. I would like to comment very, very briefly also on the web watch, vocabulary. Obviously I am maybe not a fundamentalist, but quite a free speech proponent. But my main problem with this approach about hate speech watch and the great discrepancy between watched cases and actually educated cases, it's a very, very Western problem, a very Western problem. In today's Europe, what you have...
Just may I ask to be brief, to raise a question, but okay. Be short, please.
Yes. What you have is multiplying examples of hate speech used by powers to suppress pluralism and use fighting hate speech for centralization of power over media. This is Russia with its extremism law. This is Hungary with its whole edifice of media governance. This is the latest example was mentioned, how the latest attempt in France, the latest murder spree was used right away by the President of France to try to tighten media governance. So always please see in balance how fight against hate speech can be misused and could be used for purposes of suppressing free speech, quite outside the hate speech domain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this. I will give the floor first to Ronald this time.
Sure. Milos, thanks for your contribution. We've crossed swords over the years many times on this subject, and I partly agree with you. We should be very careful in how we deal with the issue of hate speech in mostly the former Soviet countries. I'm talking about the Eastern and Central European countries. And yes, indeed, there are situations and there are political parties in those countries who try to use any way, including promoting hate speech legislation, to curb the speech of opponents and to curb the speech of Democrats. So yes, we do absolutely agree on that. And I think for the rest, there are a number of issues on which we will keep on disagreeing. Thanks.
I think also Oreste wanted to have a comment on this issue.
Very brief, fair objection. But there are still two overlapping dimensions, I think. It's clear that if you see as a crime the simple denial, then the connection with the freedom of speech, it's less relevant. But I think there is still a consideration of conflict between fundamental rights, and one of them could be freedom of speech. Not in terms of exercise, but in terms of abuse of freedom of expression. And this, I think, you can look, you can have two kinds of confirmation. The first one is the case law of European Court of Human Rights, when in many cases he addressed these questions using the abuse rights clause to try to deny the legitimation of the concern. The second one is the difference between the militant model democracy and the tolerant democracy. It's true that for the militant it's simply a crime, the simple affirmation. But then if you go to look at the Spain context, then there is a difference. There is a space for freedom of speech, for abuse of freedom of speech when it's only denial. But when this denial is bringing to a violence, so to action, then becomes a crime. So still there is, I think, a merge of a connection, overlapping between the two dimensions.
Thank you, Oreste. Lorenzo also wanted to add something to the remark of Aidan, who is not here, but it will come in the note also. I'm sure that this reaction will also be forwarded to Aidan. Please, Lorenzo.
No, it's just to absolutely agree that engaging media professionals and media is key to this campaign. The objective is to reach a very strong multiplication of the message. Indeed, part of the European initiative, the coalition, are already some national federations of journalists and some trade unions, notably CGL from Italy. And yesterday, Roberto Natale from the Italian Press Federation presented the campaign at the European Federation of Journalists meeting in Brussels. So we are certainly working in precisely that direction, engaging media professionals. There are also newspapers that are part of the campaign, Il Fatto Quotidiano from Italy, Capital from Bulgaria, and other newspapers, and we're working in that direction as well. I mean, the actual engagement of journalists, of media outlets in the campaign is absolutely crucial, and we think it's an asset also to reach and mobilize a significant number of people. We will be able to collect signatures also online, and we know that newspapers have very sophisticated online portals that we're hoping to mobilize for this campaign. The main objective is collecting not 1 million, but a few more than 1 million signatures online to show to the European institutions that there is a very strong popular support and demand for a much stronger regulatory and also position-taking role for the European institutions when it comes to media freedom.
Lorenzo?
Sorry, Lorenzo. Are you talking to the unionists, which often means people who are not doing journalism anymore, they're just active in the unions, or you are talking about like top people who are making decisions? Because we know that IFJ and European Federation of Journalists have exactly the same problem as everyone else, to get those people understand what we are talking about and do something about it. Thank you.
If I understood the question, is whether we're speaking with the journalist unions or with... Sorry, there was some noise here.
Usually people who run the unions are not anymore doing anything in journalism. They're not producing, they're not editors. So who are you talking to?
Right. I think a campaign like this has to speak to everyone, and this is precisely what we're doing. So we have engaged trade unions by speaking to secretary generals of the trade unions. We have engaged press federations by speaking to the directors of those press federations, but also we're working with media outlets themselves and individual journalists themselves. So there is a double approach. On the one hand, the institutions and the establishments of these institutions. On the other hand, there is a very grassroots work that needs to be done with the media, but again, especially with individual journalists who are becoming part also as individual participants to the campaign. And this is absolutely crucial because they are the ones who will bring knowledge and also who will write the articles about the campaign.
If the editors allow them to do it, that's the problem. We train journalists and then they go back, as several people mentioned, yes, they go back to the newsroom and the editor says, that's all nice, but I'm in charge. When you become an editor, you can bring novelties. So that's why I'm insisting on really talking particularly to those who are not converted ones. Thanks.
Make your point clear. I'm looking at Marie, the organizers. We started 15 minutes late. If we can take the time which was awarded to us, we still have 10 minutes. Can you confirm that?
I think I can.
Okay, thank you then. I would like to give first a possibility for one more brief reaction by Ronald, and then we can have a final short last third round.
It's just a remark for those who work on the genocide and Holocaust issue. Over the last 20 years, a number of neo-Nazis who, after all, are working very hard at denying the Holocaust, have confessed why they actually are doing this. And this is a little fact that does not research reports and is almost never taken into account in debates on Holocaust denial. But what they actually say is, we deny the Holocaust to make National Socialism a viable political option again. So that's just a remark for you all to do something with or not. Thanks.
Okay, I look around. Who still has an urgent question, comment? That will be the final one. We have two. First, I give the floor to Anja.
There's just something I've been wondering all the time. I find this discussion about Holocaust denial very interesting because in India, the fact that Europe uses Holocaust denial laws is very often used as an example of the legitimacy of cultural, this is the expression that is used, cultural approaches to freedom of expression, which then leads to a wide range of suppression in India, and I'm sure in other countries as well. And I was wondering, Ronald, when you were saying you were talking to groups like Facebook about taking down, say, Holocaust denial groups, are you talking then about global takedowns, or are you talking about blocking content specifically in national context? And I think the question is important because we've actually talked quite a lot here about the importance of context and environment when you are assessing free speech, but at least on the internet, some of these measures will actually have global consequences in contexts where they don't make sense in the same way and can then be read in a very different sense. I mean, in terms of how it legitimizes censorship much more broadly, because you do not have the same context and still the content is taken away from you as well. So I was wondering if you could comment a bit on that.
Okay, thank you. First was an observation, very interesting, I think, this reference to cultural relativism and limitations on free speech. I think the second one was directly directed to Ronald. Could you give some clarification precisely on the question, how broad is your action? Is it within the global perception, or do you attack national?
You wish. No, we're not very global. Sorry?
I had actually thought not speak on this topic because precisely because we are in the European context, and I had exactly the same feeling as Anja. The Holocaust denial laws make sense for people in Europe, and specifically for the part of Europe that lived the consequences of the Second World War. It is very difficult for the rest of the world to understand the same significance. I do believe that those that are promoting Holocaust denial, as you were saying, are because they want to reestablish National Socialism. Yes, they're probably nasty people, but that doesn't mean that the state can decide easily what to censor in their opinions or what not. The feeling in the rest of the world is that if every genocide were established by law, there would be many laws. Will Spain recognize the genocide against the indigenous peoples of Latin America, or Britain and the UK recognize the genocide against the indigenous peoples of North America? Or is there a similar law for Bosnia, for instance, which was the latest genocide in Europe? And again, the problem, and I always fear about speaking about this because I'm not defending those that deny the Holocaust. I had relatives who died in the Holocaust. I believe that the Holocaust has to be explained and re-explained, and memory should never be lost. But the way of maintaining memory is not through laws. The way of maintaining memory is through the Holocaust museums and memorials, through the oral history and the books, and through a culture of negating any possibility of hate speech or religious or racist approach. And my feeling is that making it into a law, and this is going to be tough to say, but I think trivializes the issue a little bit, because then it becomes a legal matter of those in Parliament. And with the decision in France, although it was for different reasons, it raises many questions about the other genocides. I do understand that Europe wants to make sure that history is recognized and is not repeated. In human rights, we talk about the principle of non-repetition. And this is very important. But you can't do that just in one case and by laws.
Reaction, Ronald?
To both of you. An attempt at an answer, at least. Yes, this is a very Western world discussion, it's true. And a number of countries in the Western world have outlawed Holocaust denial, and a number have not, and a number are in between in this discussion. I mean, I never look at Holocaust denial from a totally legal point of view. I always look at it from the point of view of prevention. Yes, as you said, those people who are having Holocaust denial as their day job, they are pretty bad people, and in my view and in view of others, and in their own view actually, they actually want to do it again by re-establishing a certain political system in certain countries. But yes, it has no relevance, this discussion, in, for instance, India or in Japan. And I remember that at times we get messages from India in which a Western person living there is outraged because there is some commercial in which a product is advertised that says this is as strong as Hitler and with a swastika. There is a totally different idea about what Hitler actually meant to the Western world. This is not perceived by some other cultures as much as we do not understand a number of culturally determined issues in India or Japan or in Thailand. So I do see the problem. I have no real answer on this, really. But I'm not saying we should take this global. No, no, no. I think we should, where possible, where law permits it, we should try to curb Holocaust denial. I'm still very much for that, also for reasons of prevention, and I really don't want it to happen again, no thanks. But the discussion of should we then broaden it, the genocide debate, should we outlaw the denial of all genocides? Well, logically, the answer would be yes, but we can see with the Armenian genocide discussion how that goes. So, I mean, I think I'm running out of time here. Thanks.
It seems we need an extra conference within the series on Holocaust denial, memory loss, and hate speech. I saw two fingers still. I give them each 1 minute, not more. Ulla Zislo and Jochem.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll take it actually as an opportunity also to rebuttal to a few speakers, because I think that my position is very articulated, and like, yeah, most of this, I do know what my position is. So my position is that hate speech is, or Holocaust denial is not hate speech. So apart from the classical normative arguments, why not? Absent mens rea, anybody is briefly quoted with criminal law. Where is the victim? How do you establish victimhood? How do you prove it? Apart from the pure deontological consideration, then, okay, well, we all share deep condolences for memory of 6 million murdered Jews. How about 200,000 Roma people and Sinti people in the so-called Porayoma genocide?
Okay.
Yeah? How about 60,000 homosexuals? Why we've never talked and criminalized those instances of...
when I talk about the Holocaust, I talk about all victims, just to correct you.
It's a statement, it's a rhetoric question, we heard that. Jochem?
Maybe a little remark on the empirical side. Like you said, I think quite a few, or I know, because I've interviewed quite a bit of them, of Holocaust deniers, a significant section of them do indeed deny in order to cleanse the blemish of the genocide from Nazism. However, there's a lot of other types as well. It's not just limited to these hardcore Nazis. There's quite a lot of people, well, I'm not certified to make that establishment, but quite a lot of people who are just have psychological problems, and it's really a question whether you should tackle them with criminal law or rather, should have them seek help otherwise. And interestingly enough, and that links in, of course, with the clarity of the legislation, is that there is a slippery slope effect. So what you see is that also there's I'll just quickly finish it. For instance, comparisons of what the State of Israel is doing with the Nazi genocide, that becomes defined as punishable genocide minimization, justification, etc., etc. So you get all these additional groups of persons in there as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Jochem. I saw one last very urgent request by Peter for a short reaction, very brief.
Thanks, just one sentence. I just want to stress the point that what we are talking about is not how we can imagine a nicely working system which can respond to so-called hate speech, including Holocaust denial and denial of other genocides. We are talking about very practical matters of how policemen, prosecutors, and judges are dealing with regulations and policies we create in very specific cultural environment, which might support prejudice and hatred.
Yeah, thank you. Because this is a session on next steps and brainstorming, I would like to add one last issue. 2 minutes I give to myself. Ronald, you just interrupt me when I take too much. To bring under the attention of the lawyers amongst us recent developments in case law by the European Court of Human Rights. This is not a statical instrument, it's a very living instrument of human rights interpretation. And one judgment of February in a case against Sweden where it concerned leaflets which were distributed in a school and were prosecuted in Sweden under provision of agitation against homosexuals led to a conviction. The case was brought to Strasbourg, and the Strasbourg court applied, I would say, a rather broad interpretation of what hate speech can be, especially taking into consideration the aspect of vulnerable groups on the one hand, and on the other hand also the target of young people, the leaflets being distributed in a school. And what shall we do with the future with this consideration by the court, this statement that insulting up to ridicule specific groups can be sufficient for the authorities to favor combating racist speech in the face of freedom of expression exercised, and I quote, in an irresponsible manner. That's one recent judgment. The other one is a Grand Chamber judgment of just 2 weeks ago in a high-profile case on Roma gypsies, the case of Aksu versus Turkey, considered a book written by a university professor on the one hand and a dictionary. I have 30 seconds left, thank you. A dictionary reflecting, of course, the terminology about Roma in Turkish society. Mr. Aksu, being from Roma origin, applied in Strasbourg for disrespect of his right not to be discriminated and stereotyped and his rights under Article 8, and the European Court found no violation of the Roma applicant in this case. But the court also added that states should promote critical thinking among pupils and equip them with the necessary skills to become aware and react to stereotypes or intolerant elements contained in the material they use, referring to the European Commission group against racism and intolerance. So what will we do with this approach, which put much more the emphasis on education and proactive policy? That was just what I wanted to bring under the attention, maybe for a next conference and a next step for lawyers to find out how we can do further brainstorming on the basic principles that have been put forward and developed by an institution that we consider as very important within our system of human rights protection in Europe. I would like to thank all my panelists who were so excellent in keeping the time. We have absolutely, rigidly followed the schedule. Thank you also very much for the interesting questions, the sharp observations, specifically regarding the discussion on memory laws, on Holocaust denial. I don't take any word anymore and invite you to join the lunch together and hopefully also some of the sun. No? There's no lunch. The lunch is skipped. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So just to make it clear, we have